It is the day after National Signing Day. The dust has settled, and we turn our sights. Maybe your sights were already there, but we turn our sights as a show to Conference Championship Weekend. Welcome into the Hard Count. It is Thursday, December 5th, 2024. Last one on the face of the planet. 20 days now till Christmas. 20 days. There's no college football impact there. Just want to make sure we're all on our P's and Q's. Maybe go on Amazon, start getting some gifts together. Don't wait till December 23rd to buy a gift for your mom or your father. I'll say. Okay, so welcome into the Hard Count. Got a lot to get into. The Conference Championship Weekend is going to be cinema. We got some great matchups. Georgia, Texas, round 2. Penn State, Oregon. Clemson, SMU. If you are an Alabama fan, you got your SMU gear on. You're rooting hard for the Ponies. The ripple effect of this weekend, I think, is massive. I want us to take a close look at that together because I think there's more than just what meets the eye to those matchups. Also, the transfer portal, it's showing no mercy. Signing day happened yesterday. The portal continued to churn. You got Jackson Arnold announcing his intentions to jump in there. You got Connor Wegman under the cover of the rankings reveal on Tuesday announcing his intentions. There's a lot going on there, a lot of names starting to pop up in there. Names that maybe you assumed would potentially end up going in there, but we're starting to see a little bit more churn, a little bit more population. We'll take a look at that. Quick note, Pete Nakos of On3 currently has an intel piece out right now on on3.com. Go lock in over there. Don't wait till the last second to figure out who's going where and on what roster. Get ahead of the curve right now over on on3.com. Pete Nakos, obviously, dominating portal coverage. He's not sleeping. Get locked in over there, all right? So, quick plug there. Also, Oregon, speaking of National Signing Day, surprise, surprise, Dan Lanning doing Dan Lanning things, and the Oregon Ducks, I believe, won National Signing Day. Now, they did not finish with the top class as of yesterday. That goes to Texas. But Oregon kept a 5-star that Florida made a strong push to try and take away from them, and Dallas Wilson, wide receiver. And then just for kicks, went out and flipped not one but 2 5-stars in a 5-star quarterback and in the best player in Alabama and the quarterback in Naeem Offord, who was some smoke to Auburn. He was committed to Ohio State. I want to take a close look at that whole discussion because I think Oregon, man, they are a wagon. We already knew that, but I think yesterday was further proof that Dan Lanning, it's a matter of time before he wins a national title at Oregon. Feel pretty confident saying that. But I want to start here. The college football playoff is flawed. It's flawed. Now, hear me clearly. We are not going to gripe and complain and moan on the show about the current standings right now of the college football playoff. What I'm here to do is try and bring some solutions to the table here, all right? Some people like to just point at the issues and make a case about that. We're going to look at some solutions, all right? I'll say this too. In the context of how the college football playoff is currently being decided, I disagree with the field. I don't think we have the 12 best teams. But given the rules to the game we're playing right now, I think that the logic of how we arrived at this field is fairly sound. It's fairly sound. This is not me standing on the table shouting for South Carolina to get in the dance. We've already done that. We've moved on. And honestly, in our solutions we have baked in here, I don't even know that South Carolina would get into our own 12-team field going forward, while we still think they're one of the 12 best teams in the country. I want us to start here. Auto bids to decide the 12 best teams in the college football playoff is dumb. It's dumb. And now maybe this will change over the course of the next few years and we'll get a better gauge and a larger sample size will provide more intel. But right now, from what I can tell, they are dumb. The reason why I feel that way, auto bids reward a conference as opposed to rewarding the best teams. Like, you should not get credit if your conference is down for winning your conference and having an auto bid into the college football playoff. To take it a step further, those auto bids, 4 of those 5 auto bids, get you a bye in the college football playoff. In what world does that make sense? Now, I can already hear the comment section. The live chat's going to pop off. This guy's an elitist. This guy hates Boise State. He doesn't want to see SMU win. I'm not saying any of those things. Actually, go ahead and check where the rankings are right now. Boise State, if we took auto bids out of this thing and just said, hey, take the top 12 teams, Boise State gets in. SMU, we handle business this weekend. You get in. Arizona State, if you put a thwacking on Iowa State, whatever that looks like, I think you have a chance to get in. So if we're talking about 12 best teams, it feels foolish to have a discussion around, well, you may not be a top 12 team, but if you win your conference, maybe you find a way to sneak in there. No. If you are who you say you are, if you are one of those top 12 teams, then you run your conference more than likely. And this is where we'll get into trouble, but I'll say it anyway. Let's not pretend that the ACC and the Big 12 are equal to where the Big 10 and the SEC is. Before you shout at me, just hear me clearly. If SEC and Big 10 bias is real, what we always say on this show is the NFL draft is in on it. Because every single year, the NFL, the scouts, the GMs, the people that have their food they put on the table dependent on finding the best players in the world of college football and otherwise to fill their rosters, they go to those two conferences. Now, I'm not saying year in and year out it's always that way. I think you have seasons where you can point to the ACC being superior. I think you have years you can point to the Big 12 being superior. But for the most part, at a macro level, and I think this year included, those conferences are not on par with what the Big 10 and the SEC is. I feel like that's not necessarily a groundbreaking statement. So what I'm trying to say here is if you're a school in the Big 12 and you want to go to the college football playoff, I'm all here for it. Go handle business in a conference that I don't think is necessarily on par with what the SEC or the Big Ten is. If you're the ACC, same deal. And that's not me down on those conferences. I'm telling you, if you're one of those teams, go handle business and get in the dance. Okay? Because we have schools like SMU who's done exactly that. They have a strength of schedule of like 75. Doesn't matter. SMU's handling business. Yeah, one loss on their schedule. Okay, go do that. Go win the conference. You're in the dance. To me, that feels like a very fair way to put this whole discussion together and to put this 12 best team discussion together. Because I'm a little bit irritated with the idea that we keep saying 12 best teams, and then we have all these back doors into how you get a team that's not actually ranked in the top 12 into the college football playoff. Again, Boise State, you're not hearing a word out of me. Boise State's handled business. They played Oregon to a one-score game at Oregon's place. Put Boise State in. Also, let's not act like there's this agenda from the powers that be to get other teams into the college football playoff. Like Cincinnati in a 4-team field got in. I'm not telling you it's perfect, and that's kind of where we arrive here. Like, this is never going to be perfect. We're never going to sit here on Selection Sunday and say, yep, no notes, 100% agreement across the board. Good work by the committee. If you have a job on the college football playoff committee, you already lost. And you probably know that you signed up to lose. But I would say I think we can probably revamp the college football playoff committee a little bit. And this is not taking shots at anyone on that committee, but just so we're on the same page, I don't know that I want athletic directors deciding on who some of the 12 best teams are. Now, the committee, I think, probably gets a little more flack than they deserve. One, again, it's a lose-lose situation. Anyone who puts rankings together, you've already lost. Folks in media already know that. But it's not like we just have a bunch of people that don't know football on that list. Like, you have former players in that committee. You have former coaches in that committee. The thing for me is, if we're trying to do this in the very best way possible, would we maybe benefit from having some other folks that are more dialed into the sport on a much more granular level to make the selections for the college football playoff? Asking a question here. Would you sleep better at night knowing you got Nick Saban and Joel Klatt on the committee? Or would you rather have an AD from X, Y, and Z university and a former head coach that was in college football all but, 10 years ago? Food for thought. I think we can revamp the committee. I think we get some dialed-in individuals to make these decisions. And I think we'll end up with a more competitive / better field of 12. So again, this isn't me standing on my soapbox saying leave the Big 12 out, leave the ACC out. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you want to get in the dance, handle business, and don't leave it up for interpretation where you got to get an auto bid, where you're not actually a top 12 team. The rankings put you at 17, but somehow, some way, we think you're a top 12 team because you won the conference. Again, I don't think that's necessarily the way to go about this. One more thing I'll say here, the seeding we have right now for the college football playoff doesn't make a ton of sense. And hat tip Joel Klatt here, he might have been the first to say this. There should not be a world where you desire a lower seed for an advantage in the college football playoff. Should not happen. We should reward the teams that do what they're supposed to do during the regular season and the conference title games, and they should be seeded accordingly. So a solution to this, or to walk it out further here, look at that bracket. You got Penn State at 5, assuming they lose the Big Ten championship. Their path is much more advantageous than the Big Ten champion in Oregon in this situation. I got to play Arizona State and then Boise State. No knock on either of those schools. From a roster talent perspective, I'd much rather play them before I play the winner of Tennessee, Georgia. I don't think we're firing off like hot takes here when we say that. So the solution here, again, not pointing out problems and saying somebody fix this. We're saying here's a solution. Let's have a 12-team field, no auto bids, 4 top teams get a bye, and after that first round of the college football playoff, let's go ahead and reseed. So let's say there is an upset for the number 12 team. They end up winning that football game. Let's go ahead and make sure the number 1 team gets to play the lowest ranked seed. We reseed things after that first round. That would make a lot of sense to me. So again, It's never going to be perfect. I love that we have human beings making these decisions. I think we are much closer to perfect than we were in the BCS. If it was all about metrics and data and all that, like, we would go to the BCS. We want people making these decisions. I think there's a chance to improve the committee. I think there's a chance to improve our structure. And ultimately, in that way, I think we all want the same thing. We all want what's best for the sport. So I think that'd be best for the sport, most competitive field with the right teams in the dance. A lot going on. Glad to have you all a part of this. This is college football, nothing but college football year-round. So if you're new, welcome. Make sure you have subscribed. Got a lot to get into, man. A lot to get into. A quick sidebar here on that whole discussion around the college football playoff. There was a segment, I think it was by Ryan Russillo and Todd McShay. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but I thought the question was interesting. Is it an indictment on your conference if a newcomer wins the conference? Because Texas, they have a chance to go win the SEC. Oregon, chance to go win the Big Ten. SMU, chance to go win the ACC, all from different conferences the year before. Arizona State, chance to go win the Big 12. Here's my thought on that in passing as we transition here to some talk about the portal. I don't think that necessarily it's fair to say, well, if Oregon walks into the Big Ten the first year and wins it, man, the Big Ten must have their own issues. Oregon in the preseason, I think, had like the third best odds to win the whole darn thing to begin with. Like, Oregon's a good football team. Put them in whatever conference you want. Same deal with Texas. Like, Texas actually a season ago went to Tuscaloosa as a member of the Big 12 and beat the eventual SEC champion. So I think it a little bit is disrespectful to the teams that are in contention for the conference championship and saying that, well, I guess, they must be benefiting from a conference that's not actually all that we thought they were. Arizona State, shout out to them, man. I mean, picked to finish, dead last in the conference, if not close to that. And they're working. We got some thoughts on Arizona State a little bit later in the show, but I just want us to get out ahead of this. There's going to be the discussion of, well, because they went to a new conference and took it over, that must say something about the conference. No, I think it just says the team's really good. Conferences aside, logos aside, the team's just really good. Give Oregon, give Texas, give Arizona State, SMU. Give them all their flowers if they find a way to get it done the first year in the conference. Full stop. So, Caden, I think I told you we're going to do a conference title ripple effect next. Let's pivot here to the transfer portal. Not because we had something pressing, just because I think in my notes I had it set the wrong way. So here we go. So we'll jump into the transfer portal. The transfer portal not open yet. Grad transfers are able to be in there. If you have announced your intentions to enter, then pretty much everyone knows where you're going to be. Starting to enter into like plans to enter season, if you will. Again, follow Pete Nakos on Twitter. Follow the On Through Transfer Portal account on Twitter. Just get dialed into the nth degree. All those things. Also, subscribe to the show here. I want you all a part of this. The transfer portal is buzzing. Continues to buzz. Connor Wegman, Texas A&M quarterback, after losing his starting job to Marcel Reed, you understood, okay, probably not going to stay in College Station. All right, he's got a good head on his shoulders. He can probably go play somewhere else. He has announced his intentions to enter the transfer portal, and he did this under the cover of the rankings reveal on Tuesday night, which I thought was maybe, if it was a coincidence, it's a very interesting coincidence. The schools that are being tied to him right now, schools like Houston, Syracuse, the thing with Connor Wegman, the reason why he wasn't able to stay the guy at A&M, for me, is a lack of mobility, is what I could tell. Marcel Reed and his legs gave them the best chance to win football games and the best chance to stay alive in football games, so you pivot there. I'd love to see Connor Wegman be somewhere else besides the SEC. I'd love to see Connor Wegman be somewhere where there's not going to be for like just freak show defensive ends chasing him around. Not to say that there's any drop off you go to the Big Ten or there's not still great defensive line play in the ACC or in the Big 12, but like for the most part, you see a lower frequency of that. And Syracuse, to me, makes a lot of sense. I think Connor Wegman and his play style, like the mobility deficiency is maybe very similar to what Kyle McCord was at Syracuse. I also love the fact that Kyle McCord went to Syracuse and balled the heck out under Fran Brown, kind of revamped his college career. If I'm Connor Wegman, I take a close look at Syracuse. And I've said that for a couple of these different guys, but Syracuse, man, the portal blueprint to take a quarterback and have success. Also, who would want to play for Fran Brown? Food for thought. So that'd be my pick there. Again, these are not predictions. We have predictions for you now once the portal fully opens and we have a good gauge for everyone that's going to be in there. Another quarterback that jumped in, though, Jackson Arnold, quarterback at Oklahoma. A lot of excitement coming into the year. 5-star caliber player coming to Oklahoma. A lot of praise and accolades and hype. The year did not go the way that he wanted. And I'll say this. I think as much flack as Jackson Arnold is catching, and as much of that flack is deserved, I don't think we know how good he really is just yet. Like, to me, it would be more wildly surprising for us to just all be wrong on Jackson Arnold than for him to not be any good, right? Because the whole industry pretty much had Jackson Arnold as a 5-star. When the whole industry thinks something, it's usually a better chance than not that they're onto something when it comes to recruiting services. The reality is this season for Oklahoma, the wide receiver position was supposed to be a strong point. It was an infirmary every single week in Norman. Like, they did not have their best player on the perimeter in Deion Burks, had a slew of injuries throughout the season and before the season. Like, he did not have guys to throw the football to. Okay, in addition to that, they replaced their whole offensive line going into this season. Moving into, again, the SEC, the most ferocious defensive line conference in all of college football. Let's do the math here. Does that set a quarterback up for success? Probably not. Is that all on Jackson Arnold, his first year as starting quarterback, to have no receivers and a subpar offensive line? Do we really get the best gauge for him? I don't think so. Auburn is a school that's been mentioned in relation to Jackson Arnold that could be in the sweepstakes. That's intriguing to me because of the RPO system with Hugh Freeze. Now, I'm curious to see how the board shakes out for Auburn when it comes to portal quarterbacks. Fully expect them to take one. Do you take a Jackson Arnold over a Caden Salter? I don't know. There's some familiarity for Caden Salter with Hugh Freeze. There's some familiarity for Hugh Freeze with Caden Salter. But seeing Jackson Arnold and the mobility he showed against Alabama, not a bad piece of tape to put on film there. So we'll see what happens with Jackson Arnold. But again, I'm not buying the idea that the kid just can't play football. I think the situation was no win and put him at a disadvantage when he was there. Jackson Arnold obviously is not the only one in the portal. As I mentioned, Connor Wegman. Dane Key, receiver from Kentucky. He's going to be in the portal. Dane Key, and again, I'm not sure exactly what the buzz is going to be for him across the college football public. If you watched Kentucky over the course of the last few seasons, quarterback play was up and down, but Dane Key is a dude, man. Averaged right around 15 yards a catch all 3 seasons at Kentucky. He's going to go somewhere and be an impact player right away. Like, I cannot wait to see where he lands. He's a deep threat. To put up the numbers he put up, to have 15 yards a catch and to be able to play the way he played in the SEC with no consistent quarterback play should tell you a lot about him. I think his best football is ahead of him. I'd love to see him go somewhere in a pass-happy offense, capable quarterback. I think we haven't seen the best from Dane Key just yet. Dane Key, a guy from Lexington, Kentucky that decided to stay home. I think he checked that box. Gave his best to the Cats. It is what it is. Tough situation. He's moving on. Speaking of moving on, wide receiver, C.J. Daniels from LSU. He also was in the portal last year from Liberty. C.J. Daniels can play some ball now. Like, I think the receiver room at LSU is pretty stacked, in my estimation, between Kyron Lacey and Tom. Like, they got some dudes in that wide receiver room. I think for C.J. Daniels, I don't question if he can play the position or play at a high level. I think we saw him at times do some good things for LSU. At Liberty, though, he was a 1,000-yard receiver. Like, the guy can play ball. So I'm curious to see what his market is, but I think that's a notable portal entry. Very, very intrigued to see where he ends up. You wonder a little bit, too, hey, is Auburn in the mix for him? Having played with Hugh in that Hugh Freeze offense at Liberty, is Auburn in the mix for him? Another crowded receiver room, but Keandre Lambert-Smith, you'd have to imagine probably going to the league. So could be a good fit there. But again, the portal, there's a lot going on, a lot of action. This will not be the last time we talk about the portal. We're going to keep a pulse on this thing all the way up and through Portal Monday and want y'all dialed in. So we appreciate you in advance for that. But some big-name quarterbacks, some big-name skill players, a lot still going to happen here. And I have a feeling now that Portal Monday is going to be electric, as it always is. This show is brought to you by Prize Picks. We got some plays for you this conference title weekend. Use code HARDCOUNT, $5 in lineups now. When you play, gets you $50 in promo funds just for playing. I mean, if we win it, we plan to win. You play to win the game. But if we don't win, still get $50 in promo funds. So go ahead and fade or follow there. Again, code HARDCOUnt. Make sure you use that. The square that we love for this weekend, Quinn Ewers, less than 31 pass attempts. I'll hit on that again in a second here, but I think that Texas is going to make it a priority to run the football. If he's throwing it 31 times or more, might be some issues. So that kind of parlays in perfectly to this next segment. The conference championship weekend is going to be phenomenal. Got some great matchups. You got Texas, Georgia, you got Clemson, SMU, but we already broke down the matchups themselves. Let's break down the ripple effect. Because in the 12-team college football playoff field, there's, I think, a little bit more than what meets the eye to some of these matchups. Now, the one that meets the eye pretty obviously is Clemson, SMU. Let's start with if Clemson wins the football game. Because if SMU wins, I mean, we'll talk about that. But if Clemson wins the football game, Dabo is going to cut the most electric promo in his on-field post-game interview of all time, or at least up there on the Mount Rushmore, because there's been so much said, from yours truly included, about Dabo not using the portal, not adapting to modern college football, having it used against him. He's playing a team now in SMU that is built through the portal. Now, SMU has built through the portal, I think, out of survival, moving to a new conference from the G5 to the ACC. They took 20 transfers. But if SMU loses to Clemson and Dabo gets his moment post-game, it'll be, how do you like me now? My way still works in this conference. He said, all you want to say about Dabo this, portal that, they don't do this, they don't do that, and then they go win the conference, Dabo Swinney will let you know. So that's the obvious part of this. And I think it also restabilizes the way that we view Clemson in a pretty massive way. Because if he can win the conference doing things his way, who's to say that he has to adjust going forward and beat a team put together by the portal? A team in Miami who was put together by the portal in a pretty large way. They didn't even make the college football, or not the college football playoff, but the conference title game. I think there's something to that, and I think that would be massive. Now, if SMU wins, just what we said on the opposite side of that, it would in some ways, I think, be a pretty tough post-game conversation for Dabo Swinney, because all he will hear from then forward, moving into the offseason, will be, well, if Clemson used the portal, would they win that game? If Clemson used the portal, how different do things go for them this season? So there's that coin that has two sides to it. But the ripple effect from that game now that Alabama fans are watching very closely, if SMU wins that football game, it is very, very likely that Alabama will find themselves into the college football playoff. Very, very likely. That would give life, I think, to all the excitement around Kalen DeBoer, and it would give a lot of life to just what he's done in a short time in Tuscaloosa. But if SMU loses that football game, if Clemson rolls out there and beats the brakes off SMU, and let's just say that Clemson, let's say it's a 34-24 game, so SMU doesn't get blown out, but they still, they look respectable. SMU finds their way as the last at-large bid. That would give a lot of life to the insecurities around Kalen DeBoer when he got hired. Because in that situation now, Alabama, sitting at 11 right now, they would get bumped out of the college football playoff. That last at-large spot, I believe, would be taken by SMU. And I spoke to the insecurities, man. When he got hired, you were excited because of his credentials, because of the record that he had as a coach all time. But I think it would kind of make you revisit some of the low points this year. The Vanderbilt loss, the Oklahoma embarrassment. If you told an Alabama fan preseason, hey, you're going to go 2-1 against Georgia, LSU, and Tennessee, you'd probably think you're making the college football playoff. You'd probably think you're playing for the conference title in Atlanta. It would sting in a very real way to miss the college football playoff, losing 3 games, your first year under a new coach. And I know that the roster got hit by the portal pretty heavily. I understand that. But still, this roster, I believe, was more than good enough to compete for the SEC and make the college football playoff. So if you miss in your first year under Kalen DeBoer, it doesn't mean that he's not going to be a success in Tuscaloosa. It doesn't. But optically, I would be very curious to see how that impacts recruiting in Tuscaloosa, because we say this a lot with Kalen DeBoer. He's operating right now from a place of power behind the Alabama logo, behind what Nick Saban built, and also what he's done as a head coach too. I don't want to discredit that. But if they lose 3 games, miss the college football playoff, the discussion will be, well, is Bama still Bama? Like, how is Bama trending here? Because they used to always make the 4-team playoff. We expanded, added 8 more teams. They added a new coach now, and they missed the play. Like, where's the future at Bama at? Now, they did well yesterday on National Signing Day. I don't want to discredit that, but I'd be curious to see where they are this time next year if they end up missing the playoff and if they lose 3 games again next year, which is a massive if, but I don't think that is irresponsible to ask that question. Now, Texas and Georgia is going to be phenomenal. Y'all, if Texas beats Georgia, I think you can make a very strong argument for Steve Sarkisian having the highest stock of any head coach in college football right now. Now, Kirby Smart is still the best coach in college football, and obviously he's got 2 national titles to show for it. But if Steve Sarkisian, in a 365-day span, beats both Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, what are you saying about Steve Sarkisian? And I think the pushback would be, well, hey, Dan Lanning is undefeated right now, and we are very, very pro Dan Lanning on this show, as you'll find out here throughout the course of this thing. But, like, Steve Sarkisian now already been to the college football playoff. Steve Sarkisian already has a conference title to his name with the Big 12 logo on it. If they go win the SEC their first year in the conference, and you do it by beating the top coach in the sport, I said 365-day window. I guess it was right around a year-and-a-half window. You hear what I'm saying. If you go out and beat Kirby Smart and Nick Saban in a 2-season span, there's very, very few coaches, if any, that can say that. And so when we talk about Steve Sarkisian going forward now, when we get to media days next year in Atlanta, you're talking about Texas as the team you got to go through. You're talking about Sark as the coach you got to go through. And that's not that you're talking less about Kirby Smart or saying anything less of Georgia, but there is an understanding now. The future of the SEC may very well go through Texas, and quite frankly, it may go through this matchup. Because last time they played, Georgia and Texas, that is, we saw that Kirby Smart defense get the better of Steve Sarkisian. If they can adjust and they can find a way to beat Georgia in Atlanta, which, I mean, I'm sure Texas will travel for that game, no way around it, but I have to believe that Texas in some way will be at some slight disadvantage with it being an hour and a half from Athens, give or take. If you can find a way to win that football game the second time around, you're saying, okay, Sark got him. Sark got him. And that cat and mouse game, that back and forth between Sark's offense and Kirby's defense, that may decide the conference for a while now. There's going to be a couple of years here and there where Tennessee gets it and Alabama gets it. Like, I'm not saying it's only those two teams, but that matchup will have a massive impact, I believe, on the future of the SEC for years to come. So if Sark gets him this time around for the conference title, his stock will be as high as anyone in college football. One more thing I'll say here. If Texas beats Georgia, I think it'll be in large part because of the traits that have made Georgia Georgia for Texas. Like Texas will be the team that we talk about Georgia being. More gritty, more resilient, more physical, met the moment, more composed, all those things. And again, I'm saying all these things before we even play the game, so take it with a grain of salt. But for Steve Sarkisian to have that caliber of team, if they do beat Georgia, and for those to be the ways they get it done, again, I think it just speaks volumes to where Sark is headed, and I think it speaks volumes to what Texas is in the SEC going forward. They are that top dog, no pun intended. If Oregon wins the Big Ten, this is where it gets really interesting between these two teams in Oregon and Penn State, because the spread is like 3.5, 2.5. It's not a wild spread. People are, I think the gap in our mind between the Oregon and Penn State logos is not nearly as wide as I think maybe that talent gap is actually. I think it's pretty close. But if Oregon wins the Big Ten, it's an arrival of sorts. And maybe it's not the national championship trophy that you're expecting to have at one point in time in Eugene. I totally get that. But if Oregon wins the Big Ten this year, it is legitimizing everything that we've said about Dan Lanning since he's had that thing trending a certain direction. Because right now the discussion is, well, Dan Lanning, yes, great recruiter. Hey, he's doing a great job. But you keep talking about potential and what they could be. Look at the trophy case. It's empty right now. There's no Pac-12 title. There's no college football playoff berth for Oregon until this season, that is. There's no national title. There's no conference championship. If you go beat Penn State in the Big Ten title, you have something you can actually put your hands around and embrace and say, okay, here's where we are. Here's something tangible. Here's where Oregon is right now, top of the Big Ten. And guess what? With the way they recruit, they're not going anywhere. So we'll make sure that's very, very clear. Now, if Penn State wins the Big Ten, this is, I think, the most interesting part of the whole conference title weekend outside of the ACC, because James Franklin, I believe, is like 3-17 against top 10 opponents. Everyone's saying James Franklin can't win the big game. He's not that guy, and Penn State's always going to be right there on the podium for the Big Ten, but they're not going to be holding the gold medal. Well, if you beat Oregon, I think we'd be well advised to look back at the last time Penn State won the Big Ten, which was when? 2016. Now, if you're talking about recruiting classes, the class that would actually impact is 2018. Well, Penn State, if you want to impact your roster and go compete for Big Ten titles in the future, you got to have dudes to show for it. And that 2018 class that was coming after the 2016 Big Ten title for Penn State was top 5 in America. That'll do. That'll do. Because I think for Penn State, yes, the talent gap is a lot closer, but I watched them play against Ohio State, and I watched them start hot against Ohio State, and then to have Ohio State just pretty much do what they wanted to do the rest of that football game up front and be able to have better players on defense and be able to move the football on the ground with the dinged-up offensive line. Like, Ohio State still had better players than Penn State. That is the governor for Penn State. So for Penn State, if you can beat Oregon, again, a team that I think does still, by a margin, have better players than you, by however small you want to talk about it. That's the way you go get better players. That's the way you go stockpile the roster. That's the way that you kind of have the dam break, if you will, for what Penn State can be in the future. And you may not be living in that third place on the podium, second place on the podium for the better part of the next couple of years. Makes you reevaluate your optics and how you view Penn State and James Franklin here going forward. So the ripple effect there is absolutely massive. Now, one more I want to get to. Arizona State is our pick to win the Big 12. I think they beat Iowa State. And if they get that done, speaking of promos for Dabo Swinney, Kenny Dillingham will cut a sick promo. I cannot wait. I can listen to him talk all day long. I love his energy. I love the way he's just bringing juice to a team that was picked to finish near the bottom of the Big 12, and he's got them believing, and they're playing like they believe. They got good talent. Couple of things to monitor here if Arizona State does win the Big 12. The first is it applies pressure to the rest of the conference that are hiring new coaches of the timeline to go be great. Because Arizona State, this is Kenny Dillingham's second year in Tempe. In 2 years, he's got it flipped. And oh, by the way, too, Colorado and Deion Sanders, it was his second year in Boulder. They won 9 football games. They controlled their own destiny at one point in time to go win the Big 12. So the timeline you have now to flip a roster and flip a program, especially in the Big 12, I think it definitely becomes expedited. There's no way around that. The other part of this, though, Kenny Dillingham, he talks so much about activating the Valley, speaking to getting the maximum amount of resources around the powers that be around Arizona State to kill it on the NIL front, to activate, obviously, the attention when it comes to other top recruits in the state of Arizona. Y'all, it's not crazy to say if Arizona State can put a fence around the entire state of Arizona, how good are they going to be? Because there is legitimate talent within that state. Like, to put a better description to it, what if all the top talent in Arizona stayed home and went to play for Kenny Dillingham? Think about it this way. Bijan Robinson, what if he went to ASU? Spencer Rattler, what if he went to ASU? I mean, you go down the line here. I mean, there's top dudes all over the place in Arizona. They got guys that can compete at a very high level. Christian Kirk a couple years ago went to A&M. What if he stays and goes to Arizona State? You continue to walk this out. There is enough talent within the radius for Arizona State to go compete at a very high level. And I think for Arizona State, too, like, they could be a power on the West Coast. They could fill some of that void that I think USC is failing to step into. Could step up in there and compete, hopefully with a power like a Oregon, what they are on the West Coast. Now, maybe you're not catching up to Oregon right now, but to even be in that same vicinity by locking down Arizona, winning the Big 12, and what we just said about Penn State, having something tangible to show for it, having that kind of exposure, being able to play in the college football playoff and having all the recruits within your state. Deuce Robinson at USC, I keep thinking of Arizona players now that come to mind that left the state. You show them that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish by staying home. Helps NIL, helps recruiting, and it would, in a very, very real sense, activate the Valley. So again, the Prize Picks play that we love this weekend, code HARDCOUNT, $5 in lineups, $50 in promo funds when you use that code. I think Quinn Ewers has less than 31 pass attempts. I think if he's throwing the ball more than 31 times, we got problems for Texas. So I think that he throws for less attempts than that. Use code HARDCOUNT, $5 in lineups, $50 in promo funds. Enjoy the ripple effect of this weekend because the games in themselves will be phenomenal. We love the 11-on-11. That's what we live for. However, the ripple effect after those 11-on-11 games are played will be very, very insightful. And I cannot wait to get a good gauge for those when we get in here on Sunday morning and break down what Selection Sunday is, man. Now, on Selection Sunday, whether they win the Big Ten championship or not, Oregon is going to be in the college football playoff. But what they did yesterday, just absolutely swinging for the fence and making pretty good contact, Dan Lanning is going to win a national championship at Oregon. I don't know if it's this year. They're going to have a real good shot this year. But whether it's this year, whether it's in 3 years, they're going to win a national championship under Dan Lanning, and I feel pretty confident saying that. Really quickly, if you're watching live, or if you're watching as a one-off video, make sure you are subscribed right here to the On3 YouTube channel. All right, college football, nothing but college football. Transfer portal about to open up. National Signing Day was yesterday. There's a lot going on. We want y'all dialed in. You're a college football sicko. A lot of your friends, if their team's not playing anymore after the regular season, they've kind of taken a step back. Not us. Not us. This is where we separate from the pack. Best way to separate from the pack, being dialed in. Best way to be dialed in, subscribing right here to the On3 YouTube channel. So if you don't really keep up with recruiting, let me give you a quick snapshot of what Oregon did yesterday. They did not finish with the top class in America. You don't have to finish with the top class in America to be the best team in America. However, Oregon right now has a top 3 class. And a big reason why that is, they had a wide receiver of a 5-star caliber in Dallas Wilson, committed to them for right around 2 years. There's some smoke brewing starting the night before signing day into signing day morning that, hey, maybe, just maybe Florida, the hometown team for Dallas Wilson, is going to try to take him away from the Ducks. Some smoke happens. Smoke settles. They keep Dallas Wilson. He puts pen to paper. Okay, so you start the day off with the win, keeping one of your guys committed. Okay, awesome. And then Dan Lanning and his staff probably, got a little stretch going, went to the kitchen, pulled out a spatula, actually pulled out 2 spatulas, ended up flipping 2 5-stars. One, a quarterback commit from Cal, Jarian Sagavatelli, and the other, a commit to Ohio State in Naeem Offord, who's a cornerback. And the thought was maybe he would flip to Auburn, but then they made a surge at the end there and flipped him from Ohio State, not to Auburn, but to Oregon. This is another example of why I believe Dan Lanning will win a national championship. This is exactly why. Because you talk about the Sabins and the Kirbys and guys of that caliber, and they do things a certain way. Obviously, their process is something else we'll get to, but like a big reason why Georgia and Alabama have won national titles, because they had the better players. And how do they get the better players? They prioritized recruiting. Dan Lanning, chilling out there in the West Coast in a little town in the state of Oregon called Eugene, is creating a power right now, and they are a power on the recruiting trail. And when he didn't take the Alabama job, whether he was offered it or not, it sounds like he shut it down before it was even a conversation. Dan Lanning deciding to stay at Oregon, for the way that modern college football is trending, was the best decision he could have made. Why? Because there's so much made about resources and brand and infrastructure. Like I've said this before, I think where you are geographically has never mattered less in modern college football. Like, you know what people see is the TV. When they turn on the TV, especially this generation of recruits, they see the Oregon O, they see the flashy uniforms, and then also it doesn't hurt. Like, let's be real here. The resources at an NIL level is massive. Like, you read stories about Phil Knight and what he plays a factor in with some of these guys. Like, it sounds like with Naeem Offord, he was pretty involved in that whole recruitment. He was pretty involved in that flip. Like, they have the resources to go and acquire top talent. And if that bothers you, like, I'm sorry, but I hope your team is bothered by it enough to go and pony up as well. You say, well, JD, we don't have the resources. I don't know. Well, you're going to get beat by the teams that do. Like, that's just that's the way this whole thing shakes out, man. Like, if you don't have the resources to go recruit how you want to recruit, you're going to get beat. Dan Lanning is not playing backseat to anybody, especially on the talent acquisition side. Now, going back to what I just said, they do national title things, does Oregon. I feel that way. It's one thing to win a national championship, and to win a national championship is really freaking hard. It gets harder with the new college football playoff. You got to win 3, maybe 4 games. But what you can control is your process and how you approach it. And we mentioned recruiting. Let's dial that in a little bit more. In the new era of college football, it is going to be extremely important in the playoff model, in those 3 to 4 game runs, to have a quarterback to make the difference. Because when you get to the college football playoff, in round 2, potentially, you're going to play a roster talent that is on the same plane as you. Maybe not as good, but probably same plane as you from a talent perspective. So who makes the difference when those roster talents maybe equal each other out? The quarterback. And again, Oregon has Dante Moore in that room, have Dylan Gabriel in the room right now, obviously going to the NFL next year. Dan Lanning says, you know what? Dante Moore and 1 5-star, that's not enough. I got to go get Jarian Sagavatelli from Cal. They flip him. The future of Oregon quarterbacking is very, very bright. They are in good position for a very, very long time. That is key. You have a quarterback, you have a chance. You have a quarterback, you have a chance to win a national championship, is a better way to say it. In addition to that, they're going to be elite in the trenches. You got to have big human beings up front. We talked to Dan Lanning, our first year on this show at On 3, and we asked him point blank, like, hey, it seems like you seem to, build through the trenches first. Like, you build your roster inside out. And he just sort of took a second and paused, and he's like, well, it's no secret. Like, the game's won up front. And it's one thing to say that. It's another to recruit like that and use the portal like that. Like, not only at the high school recruiting level does Oregon kill it, you look at what they have up front from a Jordan Burch to a Derek Harmon. Like, they don't miss in the portal like premium spots. Whether it be their evals, whether it be the relationships, like Oregon does not miss in the portal. That's huge. And they don't miss up front in the portal. I think is probably the more finer point to put to it. So if you have the ingredients up front, on the line of scrimmage, offensively and defensively. You have a quarterback, and you have a head coach to make it all go together, and you have a funnel when it comes to the recruiting side of things to go and knock it out of the park every single signing day, you're going to be in good position. Like, you do national title things enough that Oregon is doing, again, from what I can tell, it's a matter of time before you win a national championship. That's just the way that it feels to me, man. Now, it's great to have talent. It's great to have a quarterback. All those things, non-negotiables, they get you in the door. But the separation for me with Dan Lanning, from that Kirby Smart tree, from that Nick Saban tree, you get glimpses into the house, as Dan Lanning would say, of how they operate. And we've seen enough small glimpses to, I think, be able to put a somewhat reasonable picture together of how that Oregon program operates. Competitively, I believe that they are made of the right stuff. Now, again, some of this you can never know because we're not actually inside that building in Eugene. But the way that they approach things, their mantras, they're saying the everybody or ducks versus them, or like their whole thing with FIBU, like they are worried about Oregon and only Oregon. Let me say this: successful people, yes, they're obsessive, they're intense, they're all those things. They don't worry about other people. Like successful people, successful college football programs, they worry about maximizing what they have internally, and then when they go play somebody else, they trust what they've done internally. And they're not worried about what Alabama or Georgia or USC or whoever has done. Like, they're like, we have done everything we can do to be successful relative to the prompt. We feel good. We feel good. A finer way to say that is process-oriented. Dan Lanning is process-oriented. They're not opponent-centric. And so that sounds simple, but I think philosophically, that is ultimately a massive separator, massive differentiator for Oregon to pair that with their talent, with their roster, with their quarterbacking. Like, they're going to be in a really, really competitive spot here for years to come. And so, again, I don't know if it's this year. If you're an Oregon fan, you hope it's this year. It's been a fun ride, but, like, gosh dang, I think over the course of the next 3 years, I'd be wildly surprised if Dan Lanning did not have a national title back in Eugene, because they do the right things over the certain period of time. You do the right things enough, national title things at a high level enough, at some point in time you get results. Hasn't happened yet. I believe they'll win the Big Ten this upcoming Saturday. We'll see what happens in the playoff. But Oregon is swinging. They are connecting. They made a splash again on National Signing Day. Oregon's not going anywhere, and Dan Lanning is that dude for a long time when it comes to the college football landscape. So a quick prize pick square for you. Dylan Gabriel, his number is set to 1.5 passing touchdowns against Penn State. I think that the way that Oregon operates offensively, it may not be a bunch of deep vertical shots, but I could see them throw in for more than that in the red zone. So we'll take the more there. Code HARDCOUNT, $5 in lineups, gets you $50 in promo funds. They see y'all using that code too, so we appreciate y'all using that code and making us look good, making the whole operation look good as well. Now, I appreciate everyone tuned in live, man, making this show what it is. We got a lot to get into here over the course of the next week or so, man. A lot to get into. We're going to have Selection Sunday. We'll have a reaction for that as soon as it happens. We have got the transfer portal about to open up. We'll obviously have a reaction for that as soon as that goes down. It's conference title week, baby. So make sure you're following the socials, Instagram, Twitter, at JD PicKell. Before we get out of here, I want to make sure y'all know Roback has been so good to us. So good to us. I've told y'all they've been with the show since before we got to all three. They're people that love college football. You see that with how they're getting in the NIL space. They got partnerships with guys like Jalen Milroe and Quinn Ewers and Caleb Downs, so they're crushing it over there. Riley Leonard. But I'll give a quick anecdote. So my wife gives birth almost 3 weeks ago, and I get a little email from our friends at Roback, and they say, "Hey, got a sweatsuit coming your way." I'm like, "Sweatsuit? Like, awesome, that's super kind. Like, I'm actually okay." Like, no, it's for your wife. Now, my wife has never had any interaction with Roback. They don't know my wife from anyone, but the people at Roback, just good people, caring about us on this show, caring about our family on this show, and sent her a sweatsuit, which has been, phenomenal. So they got great polos, great sweats, great hoodies, all that. So make sure you get dialed in with Roback. Use code HARDCOUNT. Code JD to make sure you maximize watching the Hard Count. Code JD, just those two letters, J and D, no period, at RHOBACK.com for 20% off all of the great stuff they have. Not a bad way to get rolling for Christmas shopping too. So appreciate Roback making this show what it is as well, and making sure that everyone watching this show gets to save some money when shopping for their loved ones or for themselves as the weather cools down here. All right, again, we feel extremely grateful and lucky for y'all to watch this show, make this what it is. For Kane Smith on the ones and twos, for myself, JD PicKell, we love y'all. You matter. We're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time.